But let's go ahead and kind of switch gears real quick and kind of talk about your experience with having kids and with having kids here in the area then. So I know this is something a lot of people ask me about, what's the schools, what are the schools like, what's the childcare like, the shopping. What has been your experience so far with being a parent who's made the move to Alaska?
So my experience, I didn't find a huge difference. I think that you have to be willing to do outside things with your kids. You're willing to explore. I mean, there aren't a lot of museums and sea life centers and all of that stuff if you're used to coming from like a large urban area. It's a lot smaller here. But I feel like there's so much to do if you're willing to get outside and brave the weather. Like that's the other thing that's different. And I laugh about Alaskans. They don't let the rain stop them. Where I'm from, if you have an outdoor activity planned and it's raining, you cancel and you plan it for a different day. Not in Alaska. You just work right through the rain. Just make sure you have rain gear. So as far as parenting goes, my kids are a little bit older. I've got a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. And so when we do back to school shopping, it's a lot of Target. Fred Meyer's has some fun, nice clothes. But for my 14-year-old, she's starting to get more into the trendy things, bless her heart. So we did do a lot of heading into Anchorage to shop at more of the malls and the trendier stores. It's not a big deal as long as you plan for it. It's just about an hour drive.
Gotcha. So I guess one of the big questions I would have then, how much in like groceries would you say you guys paid for? Because there's like an entire like YouTube channels out there devoted to people just walking around grocery stores. So do you have kind of a general idea for how much you guys will spend on groceries for a month?
For probably a month, 3 to 4 people, we probably spent $1,000. But like I said, my kids love food. And I think a lot of the problem was I work a 7-day on, 7-day off schedule. So on my 7 days off, they're kind of bored. And I think it was more like, what is there to eat because there's nothing else to do. I think that would probably significantly be less if it was like now that it's during the school year. It is less now that they're not home eating nonstop all day. But I would say probably still, $800 to $1,000 for a family of 4 if you're, making a budget and cooking at home. The other wonderful thing about Alaska, though, that I've been able to do this year, that's why I'm out moose hunting now, so that we can supplement some of our proteins with wildlife. We also did the halibut fishing and was able to put over 100 pounds of halibut in the freezer for this year. So that really helps offset some of the cost of groceries.
Oh, 100%. I mean, once you get your dip netting license, which for those of you who don't know, dip netting is where you get like this enormous hoop net, and it's like a good solid, I think it's like 4 or 5 feet tall or something like that. And you walk it out into the river as the salmon are swimming up, and they just swim into the net. You flip it over, and you literally just drag them back to shore. There is zero sportsmanship in it whatsoever. It's just brute strength out there wrestling this little salmon onto the bank. But the good thing about it is you can get 25 salmon per person and then an additional 10 salmon per people in your household. So do the math. Like you guys would be looking at about, what was that, 55 salmon technically you could put away. And that's going to be an entire freezer full of like fresh quality Alaskan salmon. So that's one way that a lot of people will keep their expenses kind of lower.
Absolutely. And something just so refreshing about knowing where your food comes from as well, and knowing that it wasn't farm raised or having all of these preservatives and everything added. Like, it is just so fresh and so good.
Yep, absolutely. So let's go and talk a little bit about the schools then. Um, can you kind of talk a little bit about what your experience has been with the schools in the MatSu so far?
Yeah, the schools are great up here. I'm a huge fan of public schools. I went to public schools growing up. I'm a fan of public school. Um, the schools up here, they're a lot smaller than what I'm used to down in Utah, which is not a bad thing. Having that more one-on-one attention for your child is not a bad thing. The biggest struggle I think that schools are facing right now is that there are not enough teachers, and um, the schools up here, they need bus drivers. Not everybody lives within a mile radius of the school. And that's been a huge challenge for a lot of the schools, and not only the Valley, but in Anchorage as well. Enough so, I don't know if it's a combination between the lack of teachers and the lack of transportation to and from school, that some of the schools have kind of talked about maybe having to go to a hybrid model because they just are lacking in resources this year specifically. But other than that, I think the schools up here are really good. I think that it's a quality program. They're getting a good education. There are private schools as well, but unfortunately I haven't looked into them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean they do kind of start getting a little spendy too, but
They do.
yeah, I mean I kind of speak a little bit to the bus driver shortage disaster we've had for the beginning of the year here. I actually do have a friend that does teach in the system right now, and I mean the shortage of bus drivers has really been kind of a concern. The reason and why we got to that point, we can certainly talk about the politics behind that, but it definitely does present a big logistical issue, especially when we're right at the beginning of the year.
Mhm.
I will say the local military, I believe it was the Air Force, if I recall correctly, stepped up and said, "Hey, we have bus drivers. We are wanting to get back to the community, so we will, bus X amount of buses for a little bit to give you guys some time." So, the community really does kind of step up to the plate when it matters. All right, let's go and take some questions real quick here. So let's see. Imagine Horizons. My husband and I are considering making a move to the Anchorage area. We're looking for seclusion and peace. However, I do have several major medical issues. How is the healthcare system? Jill, this one sounds like it was
This
tailored.
one's right up my alley. So I am a nurse practitioner, but I do not work in the private sector. I was actually hired on to be a provider in the Department of Corrections. So we work with all sorts of healthcare systems but it's a little bit different because we only offer essential healthcare within the prison system. However, I have been impressed from what I've seen. We have a lot of inmates that end up with broken hands, feet, legs, arms. They have injuries, and not only caused by each other. But I feel like the orthopedic groups are really good up here. We've got quite a few inmates with cancer, and they do get top quality cancer treatment. And they don't even have to leave the valley for that. That's another thing. A lot of people would think that maybe you have to go all the way into Anchorage for a lot of these specialty care, but you really don't. There are quite a few specialty groups right here in the valley. There is orthopedics, there's ophthalmology, there are cancer treatment, there's family practices, there's urgent care, there's a hospital. I feel like it is a little bit different. You don't have as many options as maybe some of the lower 48 states, but the healthcare is here. I mean, if you're in the Anchorage and the MatSu Valley, it really is a place where you will get the medical attention, depending on what health care and medical issues you have. Now that could be a little bit different. Endocrinology is one of those specialties that there is nobody in the valley. If you have needs for endocrinology, you are going to be going into Anchorage, as well as maybe some other specialties. You might have to go into Anchorage for that, and there might be a wait. It really depends on what your major medical issues are. We have had some patients in the prison system where they have these strange, complex issues that nobody in the state of Alaska can address. So they have to go down to Washington for their care. That is very rare, but it is something that happens.
Yeah, I mean, we do have most of the medical treatments up here, but if you start having something very, very specialized, then you're probably going to have to go out of state. But that's really going to be true of just about anywhere you live, with the exception of, living in the, the big population centers that are down. Let's go and look at this one real quick from Elisa. How often are there power outages in Wasilla? Is a backup generator a necessary household item? So, I don't think these outages are particularly common, especially not the one that they had in January. I don't know. Jill, if you want to talk to that too. I don't think outages are really that common.
Yeah, in the year and a half I've been here, there's just been that one outage. And those were terrible windstorms. I feel like there's been nothing close to that since then. With that being said, I don't think that like a backup generator is necessarily a bad idea. That's the other thing about being up in Alaska. You really do have to think a little bit differently, because Alaska cold is different than Texas, Georgia cold. If your power goes out even for less, 24 hours in February, it's cold. And if you don't have a wood burning stove in your house, the only way to heat your house would be to have a generator to plug your furnace into. So I don't necessarily think you have to have one, because the power really doesn't go out that frequently and that often, but it might not be a bad thing to have just in the off chance that it does.
Yeah, I mean, really for me, looking at it, because this is something I actually bought the property out here in Wasilla. I'm going to be turning it into an Airbnb. And I was like, okay, just from an investment standpoint, I don't want to take the chance that something, there's another windstorm, the power gets knocked out, and suddenly my pipes are freezing and my investment suddenly needs a lot of work and needs a lot more capital put into it. So what I did instead of investing in the generator, though, because those generators are solid $12,000, $15,000 or more investment to get it done. And even then, it'll power the house, but it's not going to be just indefinite. So instead of going with a generator, I decided to go with a wood stove. And the thing about the wood stove, I mean, that thing can get piping hot, and it keeps the whole house warm perfectly fine all by itself. Like I was very skeptical of it at first, because I was like, just little stove there. How big of a difference is that going to make? I'll just lob these logs in here and see what happens. And it increased the temperature of the house by about 10 degrees in the course of an hour. So
yeah.
And it'll do that. So generators are not a bad idea, but I think definitely a wood stove might be the better option. You're not necessarily going to have electricity, but it sure as heck is going to be able to stay warm just fine.
I 100% agree with you. I rent right now, and the house that I'm in does not have a wood stove, and so it's not my house. I can't really cut a hole in the wall and put in my own wood stove, but when I get my own house, that will absolutely be something that I will be including, is a wood stove.
And I'm telling you, they are the way to go. I was a little skeptical at first, but I'm a believer now. I'm going to cut down every tree in sight. All right. Quick comment from Shannon. Cost of food has not been an issue for me. I moved from Orlando, Florida, and I live in Eagle River. Don't notice any difference, honestly.
That's what I agree with.
Yeah. So another one from Thomas here. Are Alaskans welcoming outsiders or standoffish at first? I can talk about this. It's probably going to sound best coming from you, though.
I don't feel like they're standoffish, but I also don't feel like they're super welcoming. I feel like it depends on the community you're in. When I came up here to work, a lot of the coworkers I have are actually outsiders that have moved in, but there are quite a few Alaskans, and they're willing and helpful. They're very, very kind. Kind of the running joke here in Alaska is if you're broken down on the side of the road, you might have 10 people stop to help you, but they won't invite you to your house or to their house afterwards for dinner. And that's probably a good analogy. Like, Alaskans are very friendly. They're very helpful. Like, if you need something, but they're a little more closed off to who they let on their inside circle. And, it takes them some time to warm up and really, really let you into that friend group.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. It's a very transitory state. So most people are going to remember what it was like being the new person here. And most people are going to be very willing to help. But keep in mind, the reason you're wanting to come up here to get away from people and the masses and all that, that's probably the reason most other people are moving up here. So they're usually not going to be the warm, bubbly, roll out the red carpet kind of crowd. But if things go sideways, then they're exactly the people you want to have in your corner.
Absolutely.
That being said, though, you do definitely get some cranky old timers who have been here for 50 years, and because they're going to tell you within 10 seconds they've been here for 50 years, and they, for whatever reason, don't really like all the civilization catching up with them, which is crazy that about 630,000 population is too many people for them, but that is what it is.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Quick thing from Mr. Mango real quick. Food shopping at Costco and Walmart really helps the grocery bills. Walmart is my go-to place for canned goods, pasta, and smaller quantity items. That is good. Quick word from Cody. Got orders to J Bear. Congratulations. And we'll be arriving in early April. It'll be me and my spouse. We are a young couple in our 20s. Any tips? I'm definitely a big outdoorsman, so that's a plus. So the big thing when you're looking at coming up here is, luckily the military is going to be taking care of most of the logistical aspects of it, of getting your stuff up here. So that's definitely going to be kind of a big pro that you guys do have going for you. Something else that I would say, though, you want to get out and actually enjoy as much of the state as you possibly can. I've seen a lot of military folks, they'll get up here and it's like they never leave the base. And don't get me wrong, they've got a lot of great on-base amenities and options. And Clooney Lake, for instance, usually stays very well stocked. You've got lots of bears back there. But it's one very small part of the entire state. So you want to get out and enjoy as much of it as you possibly can. Now, as far as the logistical aspects of it goes, really the big thing you can do is just consolidate down as much as you possibly can. The military will ship it, yes, but I'm not sure what shape it's going to be once it does get back. So that's just one thing to really keep in mind. Also, keep a pretty close eye on your BAH if you are coming up here, and that, or basic housing allowance, and that's going to give you a pretty good idea for the area and how it really compares up against the place you're currently coming from.